Okay, hello everybody. It's Michael Pierce here. Um, Excuse me. Always start off your videos with a burp. That's a pro tip from me. Um, I guess I'm still kind of debating in my mind if I'm going to do this. And, if I could tell you, there's a couple of videos that I haven't ever posted because I just didn't feel like they were not stuff with like pictures or anything, but just things I've recorded of me talking or like so. I'm giving you the cream of the crop, so maybe this won't end up. But I did write a script for this one, and it would be a shame for it to go to waste because it's a long one, and that's also why I'm doing it with just my face. I'm looking at the script right here. Sorry, um, but it's on my computer. Wonderful framing of they tell you in film school you have, you see I have the wheel here, and that makes it, lets you know that I am this far away from you. It gives you a sense of depth. That's exactly why I made sure my steering wheel is in the shot as I film myself in my car. Anyway, I don't have unlimited time, so I should probably just get right into it. I'm just going to read from my script and occasionally look over like a professional at the camera, but the script is very long, which is why I'm not going to make pictures for this thing, and I feel like I'd prefer to keep this less official sounding anyway, because it's kind of, I guess it's not even that, I guess it is sensitive in some sense, but anyway. The title of the video will, I'm sure, give you a sense of what I'm going to be talking about, and maybe give you the wrong impression of what I'm going to be talking about. Because what I'm going to be talking about is relating, and I've written up a whole thing, relating my memory, well, not just my memory. I'll just start reading the script, it'll explain it. My current job is as a transcriptionist. The details aren't important. I'm a private person regarding such things, on the internet at least. The point is that this job gets me going to places and paying close attention to events or classrooms or seminars that I wouldn't normally attend, much less pay close attention to. In order for me to be able to look at the camera more, I'm going to do this. There we go. There we go. Now I can look at my script, but it seems like I'm looking at the camera, you see, more or less. But anyway, that's why about a year ago I found myself in the front row of a college auditorium listening to a panel on social justice activism, and that is the best way I can characterize it. That's really what it was about in content. And so I wanted to offer an examination of the panelists and of the audience that, while my opinion of them is on the whole negative, it's not based on vitriol or disgust or fear or predictions of doomsday. It's tempting to simply say the audience and the panel were just a bunch of SJWs, but that makes it sound like they're all the same, like they're just sort of a swarm of locusts or something, and they aren't. That was one of my observations. They're all different, and I actually think they're much more different from each other than they themselves realize. And I just want to paint you a picture of them with all the light and shadow that I saw on their faces. It's kind of, I've been mulling it around in my head for a while, and I figured I might as well just talk about it, because I think it's interesting. Maybe I'm not really one to talk about it. But anyway, we're going to get into my little adventure here. Just as sort of a disclaimer, by the way the transcription... So I am basing this off of the transcription and I will actually be quoting from the transcript. The transcript should not be taken as a 100% word for word, though I do sometimes tend to do that. But I am expected to communicate everything accurately, and so my own biases or anything like that are not supposed to enter into the transcript. So this is an accurate transcript. However, I only have possession... I'm not entirely sure. It's a little... there may be sections missing from it because I work with a partner. Anyway, but I'm not... I'm working off of memory and all this kind of stuff, so I'm just trying to make sure that that's all out of the way before I start off. So let's set the scene. As I walked into the auditorium, I received a brochure with the title and topic, as well as bios on the panelists, etc., etc. I didn't have much time to read it as I got my equipment set up, and I'm not going to give the exact title because I don't want you guys to be able to trace where I live and stuff. And anyway, it was something to the effect of, we're going to talk about feminism in the era of Trump and the meaning of the hashtag #MeToo phenomenon, and how to help the cause of feminism in these sort of rapids along the river, or something along these lines. So what struck me as the event proceeded was how there weren't any preliminary definitions or any official clear statement of this is what we're about. It seemed like that was sort of taken for granted, and everybody already knew why they were there. It wasn't an educational panel for new recruits or outsiders. It was really more of a rally or a meeting for believers. And so obviously the reason that this struck me, because in some sense it's like, okay, fine, whatever, you have right to group yourselves together as long as you're not making bombs or something. But what struck me was that it was advertised as something open to the general public. Maybe I misinterpreted the advertising, but at least the brochures and things that they gave me, and it was also structured that way. It's like a panel with different people on it, and they said, we're going to discuss feminism in the age of Trump and the Me Too movement, but it operated more like a conference for some kind of already formed loose organization. It was in many of the elements reminded me of almost like a non-denominational Christian powwow. Like, nobody is there explaining who exactly Jesus Christ is, right? Like, or why he's important, or what faith is, or anything. This is an advanced class. We can move on from the basic stuff and get into the nitty-gritty hows of spreading the good word and bringing the kingdom of God to the earth, or something. So the how is made pretty clear, but the what, that is the actual, what specifically is the good word that we're spreading, is, in my opinion, kind of vague and foggy because it's non-denominational. That's why it kind of reminded me of that. It's a room full of people who have presumably tapped into the same zeitgeist, and they want that sense of community and validation, and are afraid to spoil it by getting into the details of precisely what they are trying to accomplish. There's a sense that they're relying on the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, to ensure that they are really on the same page, so they can go their separate ways afterwards and do whatever they want, but it'll all, I guess, sort of magically coordinate because they all have the same spirit guiding them, which is why it felt vaguely religious to me. They have hope in this sense of a higher purpose, that they are doing their own part to usher in Zion. So I've made a lot of statements here, so let me read some of, at least from the transcript, which here were the introductory comments to the event itself. So, quote, "We will be talking about gender equity in the age of Trump. We are dedicated to gender justice, to working towards a state where women and girls have equal access to housing, reproduction, etc." I might have mistyped that, because equal access to reproduction, I'm assuming that means like protection or something, because equal access to reproduction, I'm almost certain they weren't quite going that way of like everyone should have sperm. Like, I don't think that's what they were saying, so I just wanted to correct that. I only noticed that now. We are intersectional this evening. We want to talk about all kinds of women: immigrant, black, transgender, etc. Another quote: "We all have the opportunity to make a real difference. Things are happening at state and local levels. I would go to vote. Decisions at the state and local level have an impact. Be sure you are registered to vote in Maryland. Be sure that your representatives are here to promote democracy." Another quote: "I will end with a quote by Harriet Tubman. She reminds us," another quote, quote, "Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Remember, you have the power, strength, and passion within you to reach for the stars and change the world." So, that unquote. Change the world, but I just never felt like it was very clear what specifically should be changed. It's like that video by Slavoj Zizek where I think it's with Big Think, and he said it other times where he's like, I would, I'm not going to do his accent. It's just so fun to do. He's like, I would sell my mother into slavery if I could see V for Vendetta 2, where we just get into the boring nitty-gritty of like what actual government they decide they're going to institute instead of the previous government. And I'm like, thank you, Zizek, for saying that. Like, I've always wondered that. It's nice to, I know plenty of other people would say that same thing, but anyway, it's kind of like that, So I got an idea of how they were going to change things. It's sort of clear we're going to organize protests, we're going to make provocative art, we're going to vote for people, though they never specified any candidates that they were going to vote for, by the way. So they're going to form groups who demand rights for such and such disenfranchised group. I guess they're going to ruffle everybody's feathers, get their anger out, I guess. As long as you're angry while you do it, you shouldn't be dry and cool-headed about it. That's important. We need some passion here. We need some pizzazz, because this stuff is important, so act like it, So anyway, let's talk about who the panelists were. There were 3 of them. There were 3 panelists, all women, and a woman moderator. The event worked like this. Each one gave some introductory remarks, and then it was opened to the audience for questions that they would all sort of discuss. So let's run through each panelist's introduction. In order to keep because this isn't, part of the reason I'm doing this is because I want to talk about this concept of social justice, which in my work as a transcriptionist, I do see a lot on the campuses. I think Peterson's analysis of where this is occurring is correct. I think the people who are worried about it are correct. But I wanted to make a video that was not intentionally inflammatory or I just want to look at it, and maybe, the 200 people who watch this will maybe be a little more calm. Not in the sense of like, because I'm kind of worried about whenever you have a group of people who don't seem to be very clear on frankly, just not very clear-headed, and yet at the same time very passionate to change things. And it's like, okay, that's not a good thing no matter who's doing it. But anyway, I don't want to be like lambasting these people or anything. That's just not me. So I'm not giving their names, even though I do have them, and some of you may be able to infer. But I'm going to give them nicknames. The nicknames are not meant to be insulting, even though because they are nicknames, they'll probably come off as somewhat derogatory, and I don't mean them that way. I'm thinking of one in particular, but I couldn't think of a better nickname that would help me to just remember and be consistent. So I apologize. I don't mean it as an insult, because the first one I've nicknamed Queen, because it just seemed to fit. So anyway, it seemed to fit because I think she had a real ENFJ vibe going on. So hey, there's a little typology in this video. So I'm going to call her Queen. She was a black woman. African American. She had black hair that was cut in kind of like a punky way, and it was dyed green, or maybe it was even turquoise. I remember green. I didn't really like her hairstyle. But that's just a personal thing, I guess. Because it was kind of wrapped in a bun. It might. Hey, if it's some kind of if she's tapping into some like tradition or something from like ancestry, then okay, cool. I don't think they had access to green dye, but what do I know? I'm a balding 20-something white person, so I have no idea. But it was like wrapped up in like this kind of dreadlock thing, kind of like, I want to say it was almost like whipped cream. I might be completely misremembering this, by the way, in which case I apologize, Queen. But anyway, it was off-putting to me. But she was a heavier set woman, at least as I remember her. And she was introduced by the moderator people as an activist professor who lectured at the university that was hosting the event. So So Queen gets up, and she's got that real kind of FE-SE thing going on, in my opinion, that combination you get with the ENFJ, where she's really expressive, and it's sentimental, but it's also very forceful. So she's really got that kind of public speaker attitude, like that she's able to get into people, or at least that's what she's trying to do. And after sort of getting everybody warmed up a bit with some personableness, like, a funny thing happened on the way here, not like that, but like, oh, I'm so nervous, or this or that, to make you kind of like them. I do that too. Then she launches into a vivid description of the McKinney, Texas pool party incident, which I'm just going to quote what she said. So, a viral video emerged of a girl being forcibly restrained by a police officer. This was the McKinney, Texas pool party incident. Things emerged saying that the girl was no saint. This showed that the social media couldn't understand this was gender-based violence. I'll not show this video, but to place this in visual context, she was a black 14-year-old with a thin build. In the cell phone footage, she was barefoot and in a bikini. She had only her skin, her voice, and her indignation. In contrast, the police officer is a heavy-set white man. He had a utility belt with handcuffs and the authority to arrest and wound those on sight. In the cell phone footage, he walked away. After 3 minutes, he forcibly grabbed her by the arm and hair and threw her to the ground. He forced her face into the grass. She cried for her mother. That, as far as I can remember or have recorded, was the extent of her description of the incident. She said the video filled her with indignation and fear. Then she said, I read the assault as gender-based violence, but few outlets framed it that way. What I want to focus on tonight is how violence is read and received in the public, specifically the ways in which the public misread what is happening. Sorry, the quote ended with received in the public, and then I added after the quote, specifically the ways in which the public misread what is happening, because that's essentially, in my opinion, what she's talking about. So this, of course, presupposes that there is a correct reading of events, and that Queen and company has access to the correct reading, or as Derrida might say, I can't speak French, but accès à la hors texte. Insert French accent, but it means access to the inset, access to the outside text. Watch my Derrida video if you want to know more about that, and like and subscribe. The only question for Queen is not how this correct reading is obtained and confirmed, but why it is that people sometimes fail to see the truth. So once again, it's a very religious sounding attitude. We have already seen the light. We are already on the path of redemption from sins. But what's everybody else's problem? Like, why do they still wallow in their sin? Why don't they read things the way that we do? So in my estimation, Queen's focus seemed to be on using the Me Too movement or phenomena to mobilize support for not really stated political ends, like in terms of like, we will make these taxation policies, and we will have this person in office, and they will do these things, and we've studied it all out, like that sort of thing. So, but she's, anyway, vague political ends, because she seems to have political ends, so she's trying to mobilize Me Too in order to do that. She's trying to kind of tap into that force that's there. And this is the natural consequence of her taking her narrative for granted. The truth is already self-evident to her, so the only question is carrying out its dictates. I think that was what really struck me about the meeting. It wasn't evangelical, that is, it wasn't about persuading other people to come to Jesus or to come to social justice. Rather, it was about bringing the new Jerusalem to earth, whether other people liked it or not. I.e., it was bluntly political. It had that, tone to it, which is why she said things like, and later in her introduction, the wave of allegations in the last year and a half have encouraged debates. These debates strengthen the movement. We need to be better able to call out the tactics of those who have been accused. Another quote, we talk about rape in terms of singular episodes, not as a whole context of sexual violence. Another quote, "Our truth is dominated by the media's narratives. Black women are unable to tap into sentimental political storytelling. However, sometimes sentimentality can be pushed for justice." So you kind of have this sort of trying to take advantage of the sentimental powers in order to convince people, which I think is kind of it's an ENFJ way of looking at things, or in general, I think part of that temperament or quadra or whatever you want to call it. So the next one I called Farm Girl. I feel like that's, but I can't come. You'll see why I call her that. And once again, it's not meant to be insulting, because actually I liked. I out of all of them, I think I liked Queen the least. I'm just putting that out there. She was the one who kind of scared me the most. But we'll get into that. The second speaker I'm going to call Farm Girl. She was, I think, at least an FJ type like Queen. Like, I think there was a FE in there, but there's a part of me that thinks she might have been more of an SFJ, which is super interesting, but I don't know. Unlike Queen, who was sort of the academic on the panel, Farm Girl was a full-time advocate for the working class, specifically for female immigrants working on farms. She was not provocative in the same way that Queen was, but she did share Queen's passion. I personally responded to Farm Girl better because I am more convinced and concerned about the sufferings of the blue-collar workers who maintain our society's infrastructure. Because I am not a blue-collar worker, so I naturally am like, well, please don't stop doing what you're doing, because everything will collapse, and I won't be able to, read my philosophy books and be a pretentious elite or whatever. I'm making fun of myself viciously because sometimes I don't know. But it's like, okay, cool, and I can see you're actually trying to help them. You're in there with them. As far as I know, I mean, there's always the possibility she's a complete hypocrite and all this stuff, but I'm giving her the complete benefit of the doubt, because why not? Anyway, furthermore, Farm Girl had, at least according to her, I have no reason not to believe her, she had grown up as one of these workers, or at the very least among these workers. She was Hispanic, Latino. She clearly had at least, she was mixed, but she kind of had that. She was also a little bit heavier set. She was very huggable. That's very condescending to say, but I just wanted to give her a hug. I didn't really want to hug Queen because she didn't have the same huggableness, but she kind of looked like well, what I wrote here, which maybe I won't read it, but I'll read it anyway to make fun of myself. So she had tanner skin and thinner eyes, and she looked vaguely ethnic, and I'm sure she was Latino or Hispanic, but I was thrown off because she reminded me a lot of Rose from The Last Jedi. I think just because of the facial structure, so I kept, like, in my brain, I kept thinking she was from some Asian kind of heritage, but that's, like, preposterous, given, like, she's helping the immigrant workers, like... Well, I mean, I suppose in America, we're all, when you say immigrant workers, it's like, okay, you're talking about down by the Mexican border. Anyway, so the following quotation is, I think, a pretty good summation of her position. Farm workers can't receive overtime in many parts of the country. They're not protected from sexual harm caused against them. Children from the age of 12 work in the fields legally. Why? They work alongside their parents, and they're sprayed with toxic chemicals and forced to work in difficult conditions. If you have fewer legal protections and rights, what expectation of care can you have in your workplace? What chance at being treated with dignity? What I know is that the suffering is great. It continues. Every day we consume and rarely think about the suffering of those who bring the food to our tables. I'm proud to be a part of the movement fighting for these women. Their work is dignified. It has value. They deserve the same protections as other women. Fair enough, man. Just please be intelligent about it. So that you don't make things worse. That's sort of, I would feel that goes without saying, but I did like when she said later on, quote, "The women I speak with say the justice they seek isn't for themselves, but for all the women they work with and all the women who will come after them," unquote. I like that quote. I like that sentiment. because of my FE, FETI. In comparison to Queen, the complaints that Farm Girl was making were much more concrete, meaning I could conceivably go over to these farms, like falsifiable is maybe the best word to say. Like I could go over to these farms and I could witness for myself, oh, I see the planes that are spraying toxic chemicals, and I can take samples of the chemicals and and read about it in a textbook for myself and be like, this is a toxic chemical and it's on their skin. Like I can easily verify these claims. I'm not going to because because I don't feel like it, I guess. Oh dear. I'm laughing a lot more than I thought I would in this video. Which is a good thing because I'm trying to not be, I don't know. Anyway, I'm like, hey, I could do that and be like, you're totally right. This is an outrage. They are being sprayed. Your planes are spraying them on them while they're in the field, or they're getting it on their skin and it's making them. Sorry for that beeping noise. Okay, good, it's gone. And is that just gonna keep going? If you guys can't hear that and I'm just sitting here in silence. Oh no, it's gonna go on forever. Well, I'm just gonna keep going because I've got limited time before I've got to go back to work. Such is my life. Anyway, part of the problem here. So you could do that, and then I would be like, okay, cool, and if I'm in a position to try to exercise some influence to actually help people who it's like, I have verified they need help, yeah, man, go for it, go for it, girl. But part of the problem here is that, for lack of a better term, the so-called social justice advocates, at least the ones in this meeting, and also the ones who I've met doing my work and seen on, YouTube and stuff, they seem to think anyone who is not as visibly angry and worked up as them must be, by extension, less empathetic, less humane, less sensitive to human suffering. I'm going to contend, at least in many cases, I find it to be the exact opposite. I think there's... See, what I wrote here was probably more... I keep on trying to temper what I wrote here, but I'm just going to read what I wrote, to be honest with you. Moderates are more sensitive to human suffering, so that they are far less willing to believe the radicals' horror stories. They aren't going to believe something so awful and that wounds them so much. They're not going to believe it happened unless they see very clear evidence for it. Because they don't want to realize how badly people are suffering if they don't have to. They want to vet things very carefully because also they don't want to insult those who really are suffering, because everybody's suffering. But obviously some people are suffering in terrible, terrible ways, and it's like, okay, I only have so many resources, and everybody's telling me how badly they're suffering, so I have to vet these things very carefully. I think there are many conservatives who don't believe... That's too inflammatory. You're all going to wonder what I was saying there. But who don't believe stories of certain things, or are very resistant, because if they were true, the conservative would feel directly morally obligated to mobilize all possible resources immediately to imprison or murder the culprit. They would feel, in other words, they aren't politically radical because they take the situation more seriously than the actual radicals do. I'll see how much flack I get for that. I would make a terrible radical, or person to advocate for anything, because I'd just be up there most of the time this happens, maybe not all the time, constantly mitigating my oh god, I suck at it. But I do think that I've wondered that, at least for some cases. At least no one seems to be saying that as a possibility, but because some of the things that are said on this panel, they say these inflammatory things, and I'm skeptical, precisely because I'm if this is true, then what are we doing sitting here? If this is true, it would seem to imply that no one is helping, who actually lives in the area that this is occurring. And it's like the like, the law enforcement or something. Okay, so what you're saying is implying that the entirety of the law enforcement, like qualitatively, not just quantitatively, but qualitatively, the law enforcement is like corrupt and is not going to help them. And it's like, okay, great. So I guess we need to root out the entire law enforcement system. How on earth are we going to do that? Like, it's just these kinds of things. It's like they take this stuff deadly seriously. I don't know. I'm probably going to run out of time before I get through. I'm not even halfway through what I wrote here. I'm only getting through who the panelists were. But the final panelist was fascinating. I call her Dreamer. She was extremely fascinating to me. She may actually be the reason that I felt compelled to write out a whole script for this event, because she was just so interesting, and I think frankly kind of sad. So she's like this thin, older looking woman. She's probably in her 60s, so born around 1960. She was an early baby boomer. The other two women, interestingly, were only about half her age, as far as I could tell. So they were born in the 80s. They were proto-millennials, or I'm not sure if that counts as millennial yet. I don't really know what the distinctions are, but they would have been born in the 80s, at the latest the 90s, in which case they'd be as old as me. That's weird to think about. But anyway, so Dreamer was apparently the most distinguished guest on the panel. She was something of a radical feminist icon in her heyday. That was the impression I got. I'd never heard of her before, but I am not by any means, in case you couldn't tell, I am not up to date on a lot of that kind of stuff. But so she was a remnant of what's called second wave feminism. So she was invited out of genuine respect to attend this very third wave feminist panel rally thing. She was kind of like the grandmother at the meeting. It's kind of interesting. So she was a painter and a performance artist. I believe she was an FI dominant type and possibly even an ISFP. That's where I would put my money. Sorry, excuse me. And I've kind of gained, throughout the conference, I've kind of gained a sheer respect for, or rather a respect for the sheer guts of this woman and the things she would do for her art. I'm like, okay, well, but she wasn't this overpowering personality that I kind of got some of that from Queen. I feel like I'm painting Queen almost like an ENTJ. It's not that she wasn't friendly, it's just she had that sort of mama bear kind of thing going on. Dreamer did not have that. Dreamer is like an elf that sort of emerged from the fog, this wispy, not even half real kind of person anymore, this remnant from the past. So, she actually, honestly, she seemed a little bit dazed, like she wasn't quite sure how she got there. Probably because she's old and she's like, wow, look at where feminism is, I guess, It's just, there was this fundamental kind of just, I always felt like there was this not complete connection there that sort of, I think, exists in general between the second wave and the third wave of feminism. Maybe not totally, but anyway, so here's her disturbing